Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining today's Blueprint webinar, Effectively and Authentically Engaging Young People in Policy Change. My name is Savvy, and I'm so glad you're joining us for this conversation. We are just going to wait a few moments for some others to join, but while you're waiting, feel free to drop in the chat, introduce yourself, and let us know where you're tuning in from. It is so awesome to see where everybody's tuning in from. I'm so glad that you all are here with us. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping items. We ask that you stay muted during the presentation, but we absolutely welcome your all's questions and comments. We will have a Q&A section and discussion here in a little bit. So feel free, as you have things pop into your head, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will get to them once we get to Q&A. Let me just make sure everybody is ready to go. All right. Just in case you missed it, my name is Savvy Hughes. I am a person, but I'm a community empowerment and social impact consultant. I'm a housing advocate, and I'm a young person with lived experience and a deep belief in the power of youth-led change. As somebody who got involved in policy work at a young age, I know firsthand just how important it is to not just be invited in the room, but to be heard, trusted, and empowered once you're there. Today, obviously, we are talking about effectively and authentically engaging young people in policy change through the work that you are doing. Um, this is going to be a really dynamic session focused on exploring what it really means to engage youth in policy and advocacy work, not just as participants, but as leaders and decision makers. So, together, we're going to explore proven models for youth engagement. We're going to learn from real world campaigns led by youth advocates and hear directly from youth leaders sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and what that authentic engagement actually looks like in action. So, whether you're a policymaker, an advocate, an educator, or a community partner, this session is going to leave you with tools and insights to elevate youth voices in your work, no matter what you're doing. First, if Griffin is ready, I'd love to introduce our first speaker. Griffin Nemeth is the Youth Advisory Board Coordinator for the hashtag I Can in the Trend program at the University of Kentucky, where he's led their high school youth leadership initiative for nearly 3 years. He's also a student at the university, both in the pharmacy and MBA programs. Griffin, if you're ready, I'm going to shoot it over to you so you can share more about it.
Thanks, Savvy. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Well, I guess good afternoon now. I'm happy to join you on behalf of KOA today. Like Savvy said, my name is Griffin Nemeth. I'm the Youth Advisory Board Coordinator for the hashtag I Can in the Trend program at UK. I'm also a PharmD and MBA student there as well. Our program is a youth tobacco prevention and education program, and I'd love to share just a little bit with it about you. Since 2019, we've reached approximately 30,000 students in schools all across Kentucky when we do our tobacco prevention education presentations. We also do trainings and a lot of advocacy out in the community and statewide as well. So that's what I want to share with you today. My role specifically is to work with our Youth Advisory Board, who is our high school leadership team. They go through about a year-long term of mentorship, professional development, and then learning all the advocacy skills it takes to be a young person in policy change. So I've really had an awesome opportunity to lead them through that for the past few years. So it's my pleasure to actually introduce you about why we should engage young people in public health policy. I told you a little bit about our youth advisory board, but we created this because we saw a need out in the community when we were giving our presentations. So about after 2 years of giving those presentations in 2021, we decided that young people really wanted to be more involved than just talk to. And that was not something that we came up with. It wasn't novel, but we found an opportunity there in tobacco prevention to say, oh, there are all these young leaders out here who want to be more involved. And so let's give them that opportunity and that platform, especially with our program, who had just kind of been establishing itself within the state as well. Specifically for tobacco prevention, but also, for housing, as Savvy said, and I know Phoenix will talk about later, there are all these issues that impact young people directly. And so I think it's most important that we engage them because they're the ones who are the recipients of all the change going on in these areas. They are young, they have new ideas. And while I say, I'm not too far removed from the high schoolers I work with myself, even they have ideas and they have, thoughts and experiences that I did not experience when I was in high school. So we want to make sure that we're engaging those people who are directly impacted. And besides bringing in those new ideas, their ideas also resonate with the decision makers that we know very well, who make the decisions locally in our communities, who make the decisions statewide at the Kentucky level, and then also nationally. We have a lot of national youth ambassador engagement as well. These stories are what really helps to drive policy change. When legislators are listening to these youth, they really are listening more so than some of our adult advocates who have been doing this for a lot longer of a time. And so I think it's important just for me, not because you're hearing it from a KYA webinar today, but maybe you can think for yourself as well, the organization that you work in, whatever issue you work with, or how you have an opportunity to engage those young people, just consider what difference they can make at the decision maker level. So let's talk just a little bit about what effectively engaging those young people look like. There's a lot of different ways, and I'll admit I'm not an expert on it. I don't do it perfectly all of the time. But I think over my past, 2.5 years, 3 years doing this, I've learned some good lessons that I think will be helpful to share with you today. And the first is, when do we engage young people in the decision-making process? Is it at the beginning? Is it somewhere in the middle? Hopefully, it's not at the end. But when we do this, we think through a couple of different things. It's, where do they have the most impact? And, that could be as you're going to talk to legislators, it could be as you're going to talk to those elected officials or local decision makers in your community. But I want to encourage you to really think within the organization level before those conversations even happen. You know, where can you get them involved within your organization's own decision making? I know with Icon and the Trend, we talk to our youth about how we're giving our presentations. We receive survey feedback from young people, and that's more of a passive way to get youth involved in the process. But we also bring them to the table
I'm
immediately when
not
we're
much
talking
because
about
sometimes
we bring them to the table immediately when we're talking about how we're going to go approach policy. And that's something that's been new for us, but I think it's something that's been really rewarding. And as I'll share with you later, has been really impactful. And as you all who are familiar with the legislative process in Kentucky know, anybody can get involved at basically every step of the process. And so let's start thinking about how we can get youth involved in them as well. So, what does this authentic engagement look like? I think the most effective way that we can engage youth is to really just treat them as colleagues, and that's what I want to frame it for you as today. It makes me think back to Tom Cruise starring in the Minority Report, where he's leading the super advanced nation, and they have the three, I can't remember what they call them, but the sentient beings who get the marble every day, and they know the crime that's going to happen right? But they're really just using them as, tokens, as plot points. They're getting the information on them, but they're not really involved in executing the process. So if you can take that analogy there for a second and help me translate it over, we want to make sure that our youth are involved in the policy change, that they're getting involved in talking to the people who make the decisions, that they're involved talking to us. They have a seat at the table when we're bringing leaders of our organizations there to talk about what policy strategy looks like, what are the problems in the community, doing some of those needs assessment, not just using them in a tokenistic way. I'm going to have one of our KYA partners share with you some links in the chat today as I talk about a couple of resources we like to use at Icon in the Trend. The first being Roger Hart's Ladder of Participation. I think this is just a really good way to show, at what level can we engage youth? And maybe you haven't thought about the top level yet, where it's possible to bring them in, where they're making those shared collaborative decisions with our adult leaders. But we want to make sure that we're staying away from the bottom three rungs. If you'll look at that ladder, if you have a chance later, which is really involving youth in a way that they are the face of a movement. And I'm not saying that it's bad for them to be the face of movement. I think that's one of the things that we want to strive for. But if they are only the people who are getting put on ads, only the people who are being used to say, oh, this is a youth problem, but they really aren't involved in addressing it, then that's where we stray away from some of that authentic engagement. But as we move up that ladder, and you'll see we start to have more youth involvement in idea generation, shared decision making. They actually get to have some of those opportunities to go out and do the work that we do every day. And one of the ways that we translate this from research to practice, at least on the I can end the trend space, is with something called the Youth Empowered Solutions Youth Empowerment Model. You might be familiar with this collaborative out of the University of Michigan and the CDC, but it's a model for adults really to help engage youth in this work. And the three components are critical awareness, skill building, and opportunities. I think they're very simple, but I want to break them down for you just to talk about what this means exactly. For anyone who's working with, younger students like myself who might be in the middle school or high school age range, one of the most important things you can do when you're bringing them to the table is to provide adequate training. Right? These are young people, especially who I work with, who might not have been involved in the tobacco prevention space at all, or if they have, not for very long. And so we have to give them the skills that they need in order to be familiar with the advocacy landscape, to be familiar with the housing policy or the tobacco control landscape. Things that we think as common sense or the general background info we might not even talk about internally. But we need to give them some of that background information so that they can play on a level and create ideas with the information that we have ourselves. A couple of other just little tidbits, as far as understanding the skills they need. It's important to develop that critical awareness, right? How do we frame the issues within our organization that might be a little bit different from what the public understanding is of the issue? Tobacco control is complex, for ICANN and the trend. And I know KYA works very intensely on tobacco control with us as well. And sometimes, youth especially don't have the appreciation for all that goes on in the policy world already. And so we have to make sure that we're, not only giving them the training, the advocacy skills, the public speaking skills, but also developing their understanding of what that landscape currently looks like. What's the history that occurred before they were born, even before I was born, right? And before many of you were born as well, because that really helps us decide, what to do moving forward. Um, Often I'll see when youth are engaged in, maybe for the first time in an organization, they'll be engaged, but they won't have that learned understanding of what the issue looks like. So they're suggesting ideas because they are the, idea generators, right, of this generation. But they are suggesting ideas that have already been done or don't work. And it's unfortunate because the adults that they're working with might not provide that understanding, that context, so that they can say, okay, now we have to adapt and go do this. And then that last piece of that model is opportunities, right? It's nice to give them the skills. It's nice that they have an understanding, the context for the issue, but they need an opportunity or a platform to apply it. Right? And we'll talk about this in just a second, how we've done this on the Icon and the Trend side. But think about some of those youth ambassador programs you might be familiar with, some of the youth advocacy positions that you might be familiar with, getting them to the state capitol or in a meeting in your own organization every so often. Those are just simple things we might think of boring day to day, right? I mean, everybody hates an afternoon of back-to-back meetings. But for a student who hasn't been involved in this issue, it is really cool to get to join an organization, a meeting, even for just half an hour or an hour, where they get to discuss an issue that matters to them. All right. So what does, this mean out of the context of models and research? Realistically, providing training to those youth, making sure that you are making space for them as colleagues, adapting to schedules, and of course, providing compensation where needed. One of the things we do with our youth advisory board at Icon and the Trend is not only, pay them a small stipend for their time, as we're treating them as a contractor almost, but also give them some of those non-monetary compensation opportunities as well, whether that's travel to conferences, professional development, some of the things that we yearn for in our positions, right? Money isn't everything to these youth, and while it's important to pay them, we understand that sometimes organizations can't, right? You can't provide a nice stipend, and so thinking about some of the other ways you can compensate them, maybe with volunteer hours, so they can submit them for school or college, or making sure that they can get credit for a class if they're doing a co-op. So those are some of the ways we've had to adapt over the past couple of years when funding has maybe gone short and we can't provide that same opportunity to students. The next pillar I want to talk to you about is showing your youth that you value their expertise and really in a non-tokenistic way, I want to say milk them for all they're worth. Right. Youth are experts in their own issue. Like I mentioned before, when we talk about tobacco prevention, youth know what tobacco use looks like in their schools and communities. They understand what's happening to their family and peers, and they know the products that are going to emerge on the market a lot better and long before we do, actually. So you want to make sure that you're valuing them for what they know and giving them that space to share all that is bouncing around in their brain. Right. And then lastly, I think some of the key pillars that we've learned from engaging youth are making sure that you're giving them some responsibility and building faith. Um, when we engage youth, it's important to understand that they don't have the training, the knowledge that we have. They don't have the experience. And so sometimes they may not do the things in the way that we want them to be done. But making sure that you give ample opportunity for youth to keep going, to build that faith within you, build that responsibility for themselves, and learn how to operate within your organization or on an advocacy campaign, making sure that you're developing that trust in that relationship. And if we can go back just one slide, I want to share just quickly what we've done with our youth advisory board over the past couple of years to kind of put some of these into practice and show you what that might look like on an advocacy scale. In the summer of 2024, we had Kentucky Youth Advocates, the American Lung Association, American Heart Association, Foundation for Healthy Kentucky, a group of these really strong partners across the state come together and say, how can we authentically engage youth in tobacco prevention? Because we understand that youth are being targeted at the point of sale. And quite frankly, the Tobacco 21 law in Kentucky, which prohibits the sale of tobacco products to anyone who's under the age of 21, was just not being enforced the way that we know it should. And that's not unique to Kentucky. A lot of states struggle with that. But one of the things that hadn't been explored, at least in the state at the time, was how can we make sure that youth are getting that voice at the state level? So our policy goal was to enforce Tobacco 21, right? Make sure that the law that already exists is being enforced. And I have to say, it took no more than a couple of weeks, I think, to get youth involved in this issue. Now, we can forget about the last 20, 30 years where we were advocating for the same thing. Tobacco 21 wasn't in place until 2019, 2020. But now that we have this law, we understand it's not being enforced, and we have youth who have a story to share. We want to make sure we're giving them that platform at the state level. And so we developed the Ignite Kentucky Youth campaign. We brought our youth advisory board members in. Like I said, it's a small group of high school leaders. We brought in some of our other youth advocates who do great work with the Lung Association, Heart Association, KYA, and we gave them a space to share their story with legislators. We allowed them to testify at the state capitol, helped them to cultivate their ideas into meaningful testimony that included our asks of the legislature. We did two statewide advocacy days, thinking about ours in 2025 as well, where we continued that campaign to get youth at the Capitol to share their voice, not only in front of their peers and some of our colleagues that we work with day to day, but really to rally that voice and make sure that it was known that youth have a presence in Kentucky in the advocacy space. Our legislators were really taken aback, I think, when they saw 100 youth come in 2024 and then almost 200 youth in 2025 at the state capitol, just as KYA does their advocacy, Children's Advocacy Day every year, right? It's really powerful to see when all these young people care about an issue that you normally just have adults talk to you about. So these legislators are in their offices every day, hearing from people like us talk about how tobacco use is, bad among youth, but they don't get to hear it from the youth themselves all that often. We saw youth be leaders of their peers, leaders of their own campaign, from the design of what, promo materials were going to look like, to setting the agenda for our advocacy day, to actually getting to testify in the state legislature, as several of our young advocates got to do. But this showed, not just that there was an importance to address this issue at the state level, but that it actually had the power, the support of the people who the policy that we're going for was going to impact the most. So in 2024, we were successful, I believe, in generating awareness within the legislature. And really, like I said, this was the first time that youth had been involved in such a mass movement, I think, for tobacco prevention in Kentucky. And in 2025, we were actually successful in getting a strong policy passed that would enforce Tobacco 21. And so some of you all might be familiar with SB 100, which introduced tobacco retail licensure in the state of Kentucky. Not saying that everything we did was perfect and that there weren't challenges along the way. But we saw a what I will call low engagement on Roger Hart's ladder of participation, stemming from when we first initiated our campaign in 2024, not knowing what to do, how to engage youth, just a group of us on a Zoom call in the middle of July to here in 2025 in May, we're seeing policy pass as a direct result of their engagement. And so I really don't think you can have a more clear example of the importance of engaging young people in issues. And I know it doesn't extend just to tobacco prevention, but to many of these other much needed issues to be addressed as well. So I talked about all the greats, but let me wrap up with just a few of the challenges, acknowledging that, we're not perfect in this, and we're still learning about how to best engage young people. But one of the things we saw with the youth advisory board members that we engaged was that sometimes it's just too much on a high school student or a middle school student. They're incredibly busy. They're doing more cool things in middle school and high school than I ever did when I was, their age. I was still playing with rocks, I think, out in the yard. But they're, involved as youth advocates. They're involved in all of these great coalitions across Kentucky and some of these national orgs as well. So making sure that your expectations align with what their capacity is going to be a really important conversation that you have with these youth advocates. Making sure that they feel comfortable with the platform that you're giving them, right? Finding that balance. And then also, young people, don't necessarily stay engaged with the same program or coalition, year after year after year, like we do with a job, right? They graduate, they move on to bigger and better things. And so turnover can be something that a lot of youth coalitions or organizations who engage you struggle with. But I want to remind you that even with, a half a year or a year turnover of these young advocates, you just have to go back to the basics. Start with training again, start with building that critical awareness. And I know time and time again it can get a little fatiguing, but just understand that in order to empower young people, you have to make sure that they're all playing on the same level. And then just also, I want to quickly mention collaborating with schools, collaborating with parents. It's going to make your life easier in the long run. Making sure that you're talking to parents so that they understand what's happening in their young person's lives. Making sure you're talking with school to make sure you can get excused absences. Making sure that they understand that young people are doing really awesome things and should be celebrated for it. I think that's one of the things that schools and educators love to do for their students, and that can just help you in the long run. All right, so let me quickly pass it off here with a few key points, I think. Just bringing in youth early makes the difference, right? Early and often is what we say. Even if it's just to bounce ideas around at the table, giving them that seat, even if it's just a high chair at that point, right? It really will make a difference when you start to see all of the awesome ideas that these young people can provide and some of the experience that they can share that, we might not even know about when we're talking internally. Making engagement authentic comes down to a lot of things, but authentic engagement is effective engagement, right? Thinking about how we can engage youth. Maybe we're starting at the tokenistic level and moving towards some of that shared decision making on Hart's ladder. Maybe we don't have an idea to make sure our youth understand what's going on in the policy landscape. We haven't really developed that critical awareness or haven't thought about how we can most effectively do skill building, but maybe we're starting to take some of that yes youth empowerment model and apply it, right? Making sure that they have advocacy trainings, public speaking trainings, they have opportunities for professional development and to share their voice at the state level. And then the most important thing, if you tuned out for all of the last, 15 minutes or so, is that we build leaders and not campaigns. I know Kentucky Youth Advocates will probably endorse that as well, but we're trying to develop young people who are leaders in their communities, who are strong advocates on their own, and who are going to do the things that we're doing when we retire. Some of us, I have a few more years than some of my colleagues here. But when we move on, the next generation is there, and they need to be ready to take on these issues and continue the work that we're doing. So instead of thinking about how we can get through this campaign and this policy issue and this change year after year, as we often do, thinking about some of our legislative priorities, we want to make sure that we're really making this a longitudinal opportunity from youth. So I'll pass it off there, and I really appreciate Kiwei letting me share some of my experience today.
Thank you
Okay.
to Griffin. We're gonna shoot it over to Phoenix.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phoenix. My pronouns are they, them. I'm 23. I'm in school for like 20 different things right now. The biggest ones is poli sci, social welfare, and developing, like Python specifically. Um, and I'm a person with living experience. I personally work a lot with people who are from the ages of like 18 to 25. And I feel like when it comes to authentically engaging the youth, the youth that I work with in particular are people that are either like low income or it kind of stops at like a high school degree, or maybe they have an associate's still in school, um, at work, just the non traditional type of people, if that makes sense. Um, the reason why I like to engage with people that kind of have those types of backgrounds, or like from the ages like of 18 to 25, is because like I realize that there's like a gap that when it comes to engagement where people are specifically left out when you're those ages. And especially like if you're not in school, or if you don't already have connections to the political world and organizations. So I like to try to build that gap, and especially when it comes to civic engagement, which is really hard. Um, I've tried to create like several groups to get people like out and involved. But I think the biggest challenge when it comes to that is getting people like inspired, because it's like on paper it sounds good, right? Like, oh yeah, we're doing all these things. But then when you are like, you know, an indigenous like 25-year-old who's had a system that has continuously beat you down, and then whenever you're told like, oh, like you can actually make a change, like use your voice to make a change, but then the system isn't really like uplifting you, like it can be really demoralizing. So something that I try to do is I just try to build community with those people and get them to, if they can't show up politically or don't want to, like they can still show up for one another, which I think is very powerful, especially in a world where it's like privilege is a thing. And like I said, like a lot of the times when it comes to getting youth engaged, there's already a sense of like there's a lot of youth that have already have those connections. And so also thinking like kind of nationally too, because I do a lot of like engagement nationally, and working with others, it's kind of been like the same story. Like I've talked to other people who are also leaders who are around my age, who are also engaging other people that, are in that age range or younger. And it's the same kind of stories. It's like, how can we feel, inspired to fight politically when the system wasn't even made for us in the first place? So I feel like when it comes to engaging the youth, like you have to have that context in mind that like politics is still a very privileged area, like expertise or whatever the word is. And it can be very elitist too at times, to where it's like if you don't have a degree or if you don't have specific things, like there will be barriers. So by breaking those barriers down, you can really get more people involved and feel excited to be involved. So that way it's not only like white people who are maybe upper class or upper middle class that have like specific experiences to where they can easily get their foot in the door. Like engage people that don't, like the faces that you wouldn't see, like get them in the door, get them those opportunities, and also pay them. I feel like something that has been really hard when it comes to engaging with POC youth is like, I know you're struggling so bad, whether you're in school or whether you're working. Like if you have bills to pay, you have bills to pay. And something that like I've actually done with a lot of my groups is like done things where we've offered other services like, hey, we'll do barter and trade, or if you need help with something, we can get together and try and work on it together. Because obviously like I don't have any money. If I had the money, I would pay every single youth that like I work with. But I think it's very important to make sure that like they are getting compensated, especially in their if they're in those age ranges, because like you're having to get on your feet. And a lot of the times, like people, especially in the groups that like in communities that I engage with, like they're on their own. Like they really only have each other, or like they're having to take care of their family. So it's like it can be exploitive whenever you're asking them to like volunteer to do stuff, um, and like not even thinking about pay. I also feel like knowing their viewpoint is very valid. Something that I run into a lot is like, especially when it comes to like the kids that are like 18 to 20, and I say this as a 23-year-old, but like they'll be talking about things where I'm like, that is such a completely different viewpoint than I have like ever experienced. But then like once I start researching some stuff and like looking into like what they're talking about, it makes a lot of sense. They have a different viewpoint because of like things they grew up with, and there's different like expectations and societal pressures that make it to where they interpret the world in a very different and unique way. So like uphold that and listen to them, especially when it comes to people that are POC, or people that are queer, people that are neurodivergent, people that are low income. Like listen to their perspectives, because like they're living in a world that is completely different. Like I feel like we all live in different worlds because of the things that we go through and like the intersection like of our lives. But like um I also just wanted to say like give them opportunities as well to build their skills. um I feel like a lot of the times I have seen people interact with youth and it's just like a grab them, and then kind of like what Griffin was saying, like just grab them, put them as the face of something, and then just never reach out to them again. And that gets people like excited, but then at the end of the day, like you're not giving them that opportunity to grow as a person and to be like, well, here's something you're interested in. Let's get you built up to be a leader. Um, I think one of the last things I'll say, because I'm like not trying to take up too much time, um, is as a person who has done like youth engagement, I started working out of like this mindset of decolonizing, especially because of the groups that I tend to work with. Like the system that we're in is not meant to uplift us or uphold us. So whenever I go in with this thing of decolonizing, taking away hierarchy, making sure that like I'm listening up to people, like listening to people who like have different experiences, Black and Indigenous people, queer people, like it has made youth engagement so much more fun and also more freeing, because there isn't a lot of this like, oh well, when we were in school we were taught supposed to be this way, but when you come from a specific background, that's not going to affect you the same. So it's really been interesting just seeing people like grow into their like authentic selves while also being able to have that basis of like decolonizing. And for any young people that are watching, I will say 1000% make sure that you're advocating for yourself, because like we live in a world where passion and youth get exploited often. So you have to advocate for yourself. Like if you're going through something, speak up. If you are passionate about something, speak up, but don't let people just use you for your time and your passion. Like make sure that you're getting compensated in some type of way. If it's not financially, make sure that they are paying for you to go out to meet representatives and stuff like that. having you in those rooms so that way you can be confident enough to like continue growing, but don't just let people take advantage of you. But that's my spiel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Phoenix. That was an amazing speech, and I really want to give a round of Zoom applause for Griffin and Phoenix for sharing that experience with us. Their experience and their time here is so incredibly valuable, not just to KYA, but to all of our partners, and everybody viewing today. With that, we are going to open up our Q&A session. So this is a time if you all have thoughts, questions, discussions, that we're gonna open that up. Griffin and Phoenix are available to answer some questions. I see Miss Clara has already dropped some things in the chat. So we'll just get started with that there. Clara asked, what happened to the Just Say No campaign? I'm not sure. Campaigns evolve just like times do. But it's definitely something worth looking into. She also asked, can we try to get young people to go to trainings to work at the voting poll at each election? And I think that's a really awesome way to get young people, especially young people who are very politically involved, who have interest in running for office, who have interest in voting rights, to really get them involved. And I think that's a great thing to talk to youth in your community about and see what the accessibility to those types of trainings look like. With that, if you all want to drop questions, but I'm gonna start out with a reflection question first, just to get your brains going. Um, and so what that looks like is as a reflection, what's one way? I know we've got a lot of different people from different organizations listening today. What's one way that your organization currently engages youth or young people in your work? And you can drop that in the chat. You can keep that in your mind, but we just want to get your brain kind of going to think about really taking the lessons that we learned today in the webinar and applying it outside of here in your work. And I see Shannon's got her hand raised. Can we get one of the co-hosts to... There we go.
Just out of curiosity, if a group was interested in starting up a new or engaging youth in a new endeavor, like a new campaign, a new focus area around policy, what would you all recommend? Like, where would be the first place to start?
Okay, Shannon, if we ask what the topic would be about.
I think just generally, I mean, we can say um, um, child safety on the internet.
Just from experience, one of the first things that we did, obviously we had a already established board of youth who we could consult for our campaign. But we also looked at the youth coalitions who already existed. And I know, maybe for child safety on the internet, there may be fewer specific youth coalitions in Kentucky who are dedicated to that. But there were awesome examples that we saw as we were looking across, just the internet, of youth who are standing up in the communities for these issues. Or who may be tackling a related issue. For us, substance use might be a cross comparison. So we reached out to them. And then we also reached out to other states who had done something before. I spoke with a lot of youth coordinators in California, Oregon, Montana, who had already done some Tobacco 21 enforcement campaigns. And they told us, what a day at the Capitol looked like for them, what youth involvement looked like, how did they recruit youth, how did they engage them effectively? Or, they stole the words right out of our mouth there. So I think just not reinventing the wheel and looking what's already done can sometimes reveal some of those answers.
Thank you for answering that, Griffin. Yeah, Griffin's got a good start. I'll chime in with personal experience for me. I think it starts with identifying youth in your community and asking them what it looks like, right? So even just with that starting point of not, well, what do I do or how do I get youth involved? Sometimes it just starts with an open call and an open round table for youth in your community to say, hey, what are you involved in? What do you want to do? And if it aligns, here are opportunities that we have to bring you in and kind of help mold what we're doing. And Janice has a question in the chat. She says, as we are educating folks about adequate compensation, what do you think is adequate monetary compensation for young people's youth leadership involvement at this time?
Phoenix Savvy, if you all want to tackle that, you all are getting to do this work, but I'll just quickly mention we pay our youth advisory board members about $250 a semester for their time. And if you think about the meetings that we have, it's 20 hours, give or take, of work per semester. And so you can do the math of what that hourly rate looks like. But I think it's less about the amount of money that they're getting, but more about what they can do with it. You know, we invest in our students, I'd say, with more than $250 of professional development and travel and opportunities to go speak. And, you know, not all of that translates directly to money, but it is in their eyes worth it. So I think, like Savvy said, with getting a campaign started, talking to the youth you want to engage about what effective compensation would look like for you, um, you know, that could vary youth to youth.
Yeah, I'll speak from the perspective of like the communities that I engage. And I will say, and I apologize for my authenticity, but we're in Kentucky, so anything less than $20, I feel like is a slap in the face. We have a lot of youth that are ages 18 to 25, and even some younger than that, that are really, really struggling, and the system already takes advantage of them. And Kentucky's already a poor state, so it's like you can give them stipends, you can have them as a contractor, talk to them about taxes, number one, because something that like I experienced is like I owe a bunch of taxes because I was getting like the little things where it's like, oh, you're a stipend person, so you get this stipend and then you have to pay taxes on it, which ends up being like a slap because it's like, well, I can't even afford that. But when it comes to like the communities that I engage with specifically, talk to them, ask them, have that conversation. You know how you go into a job interview and they're like, let's negotiate the pay. Have it be like that. There's a lot of things that people are going through that like they won't even speak up about. But like if you give them the opportunity to be paid about something, they can easily be able to put in 1000% into it. Um, I personally feel like, let's say if you had like an imaginary budget or something like that, and you wanted to pay people, depending on what it is, obviously, that's why I think that it's like you should talk to people. But I would say at least 750. But I feel like even that's not enough. Because if that's just a one-time payment and they're out here ripping and running around like a chicken with their head cut off, 750 is not enough. But if it's like a one-time thing, like, come door knock or something like that, pay a smaller amount because it's a one-time thing and the task isn't as much. But if you're asking people to do something on a consistent basis, especially if their age is 18 to 25, if they're a person of color, if they're queer, if they're neurodivergent, low income, if they're any of these things like at the intersection of oppression, they need to be paid an actual amount that's not going to be like, oh, here's like $5. There's a lot of other things that you can do for compensation as well. Like, let's say if you guys don't have the money, like there should be other ways that y'all can turn that lack of being able to pay into something. Hey, maybe we will write you a recommendation letter for a board. That will be something that people appreciate. maybe we know some people that, are hiring about something, and you said that you need like a job and you're interested in this. Let's go get you into that org so that way we can build you up as a person. There's other ways to think about how to compensate people more than just money. But I think when it comes to the money, like it has to definitely be like based on that person's situation, like sit down and have a conversation with them. But also, like, it should not be anything that's less than like, I don't know, like I can't even put a specific number, but I just feel like thinking about the context of the economy and then young people where they fall into that. And then also how Kentucky's already poor as it is, like there's those different nuances that I try to think about.
Yeah, Griffin and Phoenix both bring up really, really good points. I will say in the time I've spent as a youth consultant, on national boards, on state boards, a big thing that organizations really have to take into account is that um, there's not really data points for 18 to 24 or 26-year olds, which is what most organizations consider young adults. But in working age Kentuckians, 16.4% of those working age Kentuckians live below the poverty line. So your organization really needs to look into what area are you in. I know we've got a lot of people from across the state today, and say, are these young people living in an area where a lot of folks are below the poverty line? Are they coming from generational areas of poverty? You also need to look at the fact that, especially depending on the type of work that you're asking youth to involve themselves in, we are not coming to a factory and just producing physical labor. We are not going to an office job and typing every day. Usually, when you are asking youth consultants to come in, you are asking them to provide their emotional labor, their physical labor. You're asking them to bring up what could be trauma for them. And so there has to be a certain level of compensation for that, right? Because then you're asking this young person to utilize their experience, their trauma, their emotional labor to either push forward your campaign or push forward something for them. And so we need to make sure that we're compensating that, appropriately and accurately. A lot of that also depends on your organization size, right? If you are a larger, more well-funded organization, you are obviously going to have the ability to pay young adults and young people more, and you absolutely should, no questions asked. If you are a smaller organization or you are just starting up, have that honest and transparent conversation when you bring youth to the table and say, hey, we don't really have the budget to pay you $20 an hour, but we can provide $10 an hour and we'll make sure there's food at every meeting, or there's different things. Phoenix brought up a really good idea to look at alternate forms of compensation, as young people we're open to that kind of thing, but we need you to be honest and transparent about that as an organization. All right, and it is about 12:50. So, do we have any more questions? Questions, questions, questions. Last call for questions. All right. Thank you all for engaging in that. I really appreciate the great questions that you all asked. I want to again thank Griffin and Phoenix. Um, I do want you to take one more moment, um, and think, to really reflect on this today, and make sure we're not just stopping this conversation at the end of this webinar, but also taking that back into your communities and having conversations with your colleagues, with your supervisors, with your grantors about what this looks like. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Clarissa to give us a closeout. Thank you all again for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Savvy. Thank you all so much to our presenters, Griffin, Savvy, and Phoenix. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your expertise. And thank you to all of those who attended today's Blueprint webinar around effectively engaging young people in policy change. We hope that you gained insights around ways to continue speaking up for kids in the interim and in preparation for the 2026 budget session. So KYA will be following up via email with those who attended today with all of the links and resources and everything that was discussed today as we gear up for the next General Assembly. If you haven't already, please be sure to follow KYA on social media and sign up for our newsletter so that you can stay up to date on all of the latest happenings. All of our social links are on this screen right here, or you can scan the QR code for our email blast, which goes out every Friday. And thank you again for joining us today, and we hope that you have a great week.
Clarissa, really quick, I think we have one more question, which is a really good one.
Okay.
I know this session was likely recorded today. Janice asked, will this webinar be archived anywhere for them to watch again?
Yes, we will share this. We'll share the link to this in our weekly wrap up, but we will also share it on our YouTube channel.